The question is basically, what is the role of architecture in Agile? How do Agile and architecture fit together? How does Agile apply? How does architecture apply in the Agile world? So, reviewing some of the things we did yesterday. Short vision. Hero is a model of solving software problems that the primary problem is, let's get it solved right now. We solve today's problem today. It's a basic method of software. Most software that gets written in the world is solved via a hero model. In some large organizations, we switch out of a hero model and we find out that making people work together is a harder problem than just getting the work done. If you have more work than a small team can do in a year, and you want to get the software system built in less than a year, then I need more people. If I get more people, it turns out the coordination problem of getting people to work together very, very quickly becomes the hardest problem we're facing. And the issue of getting the software done turns into, honestly, a secondary problem. Coordination's the big problem. Waterfall is the really only really well-known method for doing coordination of large groups that we've discovered in the last 5,000 years of civilization, right? The Greeks used a model much like a waterfall model when running their phalanxes against the Persians in 500 BC. And we saw similar things in China even before then. Waterfall is a great way of doing coordination. Agile says, hey, when you build software, I'm going to build software, and then the software is going to stick around for a while, right? And so rather than optimizing for the project, what I'd like to do is optimize across the product's lifespan, and we need to be able to handle how you build software across the N years of a product. My understanding is that most current software products have a lifespan of 7 years on the short side to some mainline systems have been running for 30 or 40 years. And so the question is, how do I write software that takes the total cost of ownership of my system and keeps it low, rather than just writing what we need to finish the project? The core challenge that Agile is trying to handle is, we know the customer needs are going to change, the requirements are going to change, the design is going to change, and everything else about the system is going to change too. So Agile fundamentally is a question of, how do I set up my systems to support change? Okay, that's the reminder from yesterday. Agile is a product lifespan, how do I optimize change, and we have several principles that we sit on. We like to run feedback systems for our decisions. We prefer not to have heavy planning. We prefer not to just rely on an expert. We like collaboration as an organizational principle. We like collaboration as our approach to solving problems. When we want to solve a problem, the team makes the decision. Very heavily invested in. If you are somebody involved in writing the code, then you get a vote on how the code gets written. And if you're not writing the code, then you get to advise, and the team gets to ignore your advice if they find that the situation on the ground doesn't match it. And you have and then we have a let's work on the most important thing. Let's not just set up a schedule, because scheduling means that you're planning to work on something that's less important when you could be working on something that's more important. And let's not just run off of interrupts. Hey, I need you to do this right now. So this is the basic theory of Agile in 5 minutes. And we need to figure out how this fits into the architectural world, or how architecture fits into this world. Okay. Agile architecture, what do we mean? Well, architecture work done in support of an Agile project. The question is, how much architecture should still be done? And how much in the way of design choices? So there's an interesting question. Is architecture and design the same thing, or is it almost the same thing, or what's the relationship between architecture and design? It's a worthwhile question, and turns out it's a moderately tricky question. Architecture is frequently a high-level view of design. And they are very related topics, at least. Agile tends to say the people in the team need to make the decisions. The architect needs to advise. Historical architecture says the architects decide and the team follows. This is a substantial conflict, and it's a big chunk of why Agile has this difficulty. How does Agile and architecture fit together? Okay. Agile has a strong preference for speed in the decision-making process. if you are doing Agile, you are probably doing something where we are focused on speed as a primary in how to get stuff to market quicker, how to get it out of the hands of the team and in how to get it out of the hands of the team and into the hands of the customer relatively quicker. And so we have a second conflict between architects and the Agile approach. Architects want to take time and make best decisions. Agile wants to make decisions quickly that are changeable, right? Those are the directions, and whereas architecture has this problem moderately in a moderately central place, when dealing with Agile, perhaps an even worse problem is in the database analysis approach, database analysis and design. Agile simply pointing in a very, very different direction. So, how do we want to understand Agile architecture? Fact is, there isn't a well-accepted approach. In fact, there's this huge divergence in modern approaches in that most people doing Agile are only talking about the process side of Agile. They're not really talking about the technical side of Agile. The technical side of Agile is poorly understood by most folks. And so there's a lot of conflict there between the non-technical Agile and the architects. If you look at the technical Agile stuff, you start seeing, oh, well, attention to good design is necessary to good software, and so of course we're going to pay attention to good design. The only question that we have is, how long should it take to pay attention to good design? Not, is architecture an important thing? Hold on just a second. Sorry, I'm working from home and baby just walked into the room. That was the funniest video on the internet a couple weeks ago, but it's less funny when it happens to you. How are we doing Agile architecture? So what is our problem, right? The problem we are trying to handle in Agile is, how do you build systems where you can change your mind relatively quickly, you can change your systems relatively quickly when the circumstances change, right? That is the basic Agile problem, and That's the Agile problem. Okay, what about the rest of the system? What about the problem that isn't the Agile side of things? What else are we doing? Well, there's the architectural side. The architectural side tends to think of the problem as, oh, I just want to provide good, cost-effective solutions to the business problems. Make sure the information gets to the right place and make sure we can share data between systems. Architecture has a theory that says we want to minimize wasted effort. Agile has a theory that says, I guarantee you we're going to have some wasted effort. And what I will do instead is focus on the ability to change, knowing that we are going to change our mind. And then the architectural point of view wants to push on systems delivery work as well, right? Things that architects have been known to do that aren't strictly the job. We don't actually need a master plan that handles everything. We don't actually need a giant, hey, we are going to build software that's good because we want software that's good. And we don't want to just write, according to the architects, we don't want to just write one-off solutions because that might get in the way of our greater business strategy. Okay, so what does that give us? Making a bunch of decisions top-down doesn't tend to give us solutions because the world changes before we finish our planning. Waterfall has been drifting to a few projects. In general, Waterfall has been used more for larger projects recently, and more smaller projects are drifting in the direction of Agile. Estimation is a mess. Variation is plus or minus an order of magnitude on early estimates. And so we don't tend to be able to do very good estimation. And if you do strictly bottom-up work, you end up with duplication, you end up with applications that have information that other people need that we don't share effectively. We get some amount of misdirected effort. How do we deal with this? Architects historically have gone top-down. Agilists historically go strictly bottom-up. How do you merge these two? Well, Agile's general answer is some things are more important than other things. What we really want to do, one of the primary things that Agile attempts to say is, historically, we solve problems by scheduling work. I want to do this piece of work first and this piece of work second. And I want to do these 5 pieces of work among these 10 teams third. Agile says no. First, second, third. We work on the first thing, we finish the first thing. We work on the second thing, we finish the second thing. put as much energy as is reasonable, and maybe a little bit more than is reasonable, into targeting something first and succeeding in the first thing, and then finishing that, moving on to the next one. So the architectural difficulty here is, how do I do the analysis? How do I do some form of prioritization? How do I do a focusing exercise without effectively exhaustive planning? Bunch of tools can support a lot of this. Enterprise architecture comes from a world where everything was custom development. Back in the 80s, it's good for managing, perhaps. It's good for keeping technology, keeping the IT organization with a seat at the table in terms of deciding what business needs to do. And so historically, we had this problem. Business had things it wanted to do, and if you just did all of the things that business wanted to do, that resulted in a system that was, for lack of any better words, bad, right? We couldn't actually run our systems with the world that just doing business projects got us. What we need instead is, I need to be able to do some technical work to keep our systems functioning. And so enterprise architecture basically is there to say, we need to attend to technical quality so that our systems can keep working, so that we can optimize. You don't just get this project. If we do this other step in the meantime, we can get a better result for the business, better, faster, cheaper kinds of things. But then time has gone by, and we're back in a custom development world where a lot of software is, hey, let's build something. But the environment's changed a lot. We talked last session about clouds, containers, software as a service, web services, having APIs available. Outsourcing has been big. Some people are dipping their toes into test-driven development. That's me as a test-driven development fan practitioner for the last almost 20 years. What I see in organizations is some people are thinking about test-driven development and touching it. Very few people are doing it very well. And then you have additional work in data marts and warehouses and lakes and all sorts of stuff. So how do you do architecture in a way that works with Agile? It needs to be fast, it needs to be responsive, it needs to be able to change. How do we get just enough architecture? How do we deal with this? We focus on the APIs. We do not approach things as a, here's what you're going to do, but we approach it with a discussion of, here's what we need to do. And that means the architect's not making all of the calls. We don't focus on low or no redundancy. We focus on, yes, we will run into some redundancy and we can live with that so long as we're paying attention. We focus less on, hey, here's how I'm going to design and architect the necessary support for all the systems. More, we make sure that our systems are built so that we could place them into the cloud as necessary. We're trying to move architecture into the Agile world. Can you run architecture as a sprint? Huh. That's interesting. Does the application architecture need to be defined in advance of each project? There is an interesting question, and the Agilists, if you just talk to Agilists, and this is not, oh, talk to whoever we like in the Agile space. If you talk to Agilists, and this includes highly technical Agilists, and I'll place myself in that category as well. Do I need to define the application architecture in advance? Short answer is no. If I am building a system, most systems, not all systems, most systems, one of the things we need to do is explore what technologies are available to solve the problem. Application architects frequently know what technologies are available and what technologies might be useful, and can inform teams about what options exist that the team might not have known about. It's a very, very valuable thing for architects to do for a team. And that's nice. But Agile tends to be pretty aggressive here in terms of, no, the team has to make decisions about what technologies we look at. Remember, part of the reason we have Agile in the first place is because there was too much decisioning about tooling and what tool you need to use in order to solve that problem. This decided at a level outside the team, when a lot of it comes down to a theoretical understanding of what the problem is rather than an actual understanding of the problem. So the question is, can we do enterprise architecture incrementally? Do we need the whole picture set up? Agile answer, no. Can we do architecture incrementally, design using sprints? Yes, but maybe even we could blend that in with more of the work. Agile tends to not appreciate very much the kinds of documents that are traditionally produced by architects. The diagrams are considered a form of documentation that is not well appreciated. So what's Agile architecture trying to do? We are trying to do fast optimization across the enterprise. We are trying to interact with Agile development teams. We are trying to keep our infrastructure low cost. We are trying to confirm that the stuff that is being developed is high quality. We're trying to ensure the ability to operate quickly and be able to change. And hopefully, we're trying to help with defining application boundaries. If we do all of that, then life is pretty good. We might be able to get better time to market. The real problems that Agile faces are how Agile integrates when you're trying to build bigger solutions. And so Agile architecture is attempting to deal with the larger solutions. Architects end up much closer to integrated in the code. Preferentially, an architect is actually doing development a reasonable portion of the time. Agile is mostly a solution for how you deal with things on an individual team level. Architects are a hook for Agile into the enterprise, technically. Focus on integration outside the teams, setting up generic approaches to how we handle infrastructure, how we handle scalability, and making room for innovation in some places where we might not disrupt other ones. When you're seeing a lot of Agile architecture, a reasonable chunk of Agile architecture simply means we get architects into Agile projects. And there is some amount of architecture being done at the enterprise architecture level, but there's a bunch of approaches. One approach is we do a lot of upfront architecture visioning. We have a architecture owner, much like we have a product owner. Agile architecture, where you have an architect involvement during project execution, but involvement in the Agile world means participation, not just advice most of the time. So an architect can step into a project part-time and help build the code and help folks to understand better approaches. Agile architecture up front, scaled Agile framework. Scaled Agile framework is probably the single biggest point of controversy in all of Agile as of today. Scaled Agile framework. Fundamentally, the question that comes up in scaled Agile framework is, Agile is primarily a method for delivering software with teams. Traditional corporate organization, waterfall, and architecture are all trying to answer the question of how do you coordinate between different teams. The methods they use to solve the problems are drastically different. What SAFe does, and it's really good at this, is SAFe provides an interface point where we're going to decrease a little bit the amount of waterfall planning, command and control approach from the center. We are going to decrease the amount of agility, flexibility, responsiveness that we get at the team level. And we're going to provide what is effectively a layer of integration between traditional management and architecture and organizational approaches and standard Agile approaches. As a crazy extreme Agilist, I'm not very fond of SAFe. As somebody who understands that organizational change is really hard, I appreciate SAFe as providing a bridge to allow Agile to mostly continue at the team level and not interfere too much with the management level. I would prefer interfering more with the management level and transforming more, but scaled Agile is a nice way to bridge the gap regardless of how much some more aggressive Agile folks like myself would prefer to do more. Agile architecture up front. Oh, and so of course there's layers of planning that go on where you do some amount of Agile architecture early in a planning phase before it gets down to the individual team level. Agile architecture up front is, if you're doing a big project, you need some form of coordination. The bigger the project, the more coordination it requires. So the big deal that folks, and again, we've seen relatively moderately sized problems. 50 developers, couple years running Agile. What Agile wants to do from an architectural point of view is not say, I want to avoid doing design work. We really like good design. What we want to do is instead say, you know, I don't want one design. What I want is a design recommendation that I can try really quickly, test to see if it works well enough. And if it doesn't, I would like a different design. We are not attached to no design. We actually like design. Most Agilists and the people who started technical Agile were all architect level understanding developers. If you look at object-oriented software, the core book, the #1 book on how to organize software is the patterns book. And the people doing Agile at the very beginning were people involved with writing the patterns book. We're very serious about good design and organizing our code well so it works. The problem is we don't want a long effort to make a decision before trying it. What we want is, here's my best guess for what might work. Let's try it and see. And let's find out quickly how well it works by setting up automated performance testing, by setting up automated load testing, those kinds of things. Or we say, okay, instead of giving me an architectural design, what we'd like is to get 3 architectural designs. If you give me 3 designs for how the system can work, we can try them and see how the system works. And if you build 3 designs, we could try all 3, and rather than running off of a, hey, here's my best guess, we could test and find out. Feedback systems to make decisions instead of upfront planning. Fewer documents, more sketches. Fewer decisions, more hypotheses. This is the kind of model we're chasing. So there's some folks in the architectural world who are trying to figure out how to get architectural work done in Agile. And sometimes that leads to an Agile architecture practice. Agile Architecture Revolution is a book by Jason Bloomberg. The focus is the core of Agile is software needs to be able to change. Whereas historically, when we wrote software, we would optimize for all sorts of different things. In the modern world, the question of what do you optimize for? You optimize for change. How easy can I make a change to it? So the ability to make changes to behavior and semantics is a big deal. It means that the traditional architecture role of I would like to optimize everything falls off to some extent. We don't have the same level of optimizing for all these other issues. We end up optimizing for my ability to handle future requirements and the ability to change. One of the early Agilists who has been involved in XP even longer than I have, which is saying a lot, since before the year 2000, is Martin Fowler, trying to define what Agile architecture is. Martin Fowler has a lot of things to say. most of what he says these days ends up on his blog, which I think is hosted at ThoughtWorks. And you have to remember, the originators of Agile, folks like Kent Beck and Ward Cunningham and Don Wells and Ron Jeffries and Martin Fowler, more than half of them were architect-level developers, folks who could do architecture but stayed involved in the code. There's heavy fondness for good design. Almost everybody involved in Agile at the beginning was a small talk person, which was the most design-centric language yet written. Pretty big deal. Architecture there, Martin Fowler's a great person to look into. And then there's a example, hey, there's what do Agile architects do? And fundamentally, the line is, I need an architecture that supports change, right? Their line is, I need an architecture that can adapt to situations. I do not need necessarily an architecture that emerges from the weeds. That's not necessarily the best approach. Those of us who come from a test-driven development, test-driven design example might start to argue with that, but that's at least worth discussing. We don't want deterministic architecture. We don't want reductionistic. What we want is a system built to be able to change. And an awful lot of architecture changes from framework-centric into practice-centric. Here's what I want you to do architecturally. Is Agile architecture potentially an EA practice? Yes, it is. Fits into existing architectural things. We have lines of business and goals and initiatives and systems and performance, and agility is going to more and more contribute to what things we are trying to make decisions about. So, Netflix is one of everybody's favorite models for Agile technical behavior. They don't tend to use the word Agile technical behavior, but there's an enormous interest in what Netflix does because they've done magic. Netflix is like, for a few years there, it seemed like Netflix was half of all internet traffic. It was enormous amounts of data volume traveling through and trying to set things up to working. Netflix, one, pushed for automation, much like all the serious Silicon Valley approaches. Remove the unnecessary, do automation, do more automation, do more automation. If we're going to work in the modern world, I need the ability to automate the heck out of everything. Any manual step between start this and deploy to production is a really bad idea. We are doing everything we can. Our wish is, customer says, here's what I want. Developer writes a line of code, and the next minute, that line of code is working in production, having been tested. Everything shy of that is a weakness that we want to avoid. Can we get there? I don't know, but that's the model. And architecture is a step that frequently tries to delay that by days, weeks, months. So trying to avoid the delay is central. Netflix has gone a long ways in the direction of this. Their reliability stuff, they do heavily hypothesis-driven reliability. With that much traffic, they need absurd levels of reliability. And their absurd levels of reliability come mostly by using stuff like Chaos Monkey, which shuts stuff down. Hey, I've got a system running, except my system stops. My server is automatically shut down as if there was an outage. And so one of the things Netflix has done is focused aggressively on the ability to deal with outages. It's pretty cool stuff if you end up going to look at it. Agile architecture, the enterprise is a complex system. The ability to make changes is a property of the organization and of the software systems. And our goal in enterprise architecture needs to be having the ability to change, having the ability to make course corrections. Any architectural plan that is, here is the system we're going to use for the foreseeable future, probably not our plan. Here is the problem we're solving, here is how this is working today, and if circumstances change, we will change this too, is the modern model. Agile cares a lot about architecture, or at least some layers of Agile care a lot about architecture. Really short digression. Remember, maybe yesterday I said Agile has a bunch of categories. Right? If you say, hey, are you doing Agile? Almost everybody says yes. Like 90% of everybody's doing some form of Agile project management. Half of everybody doing Agile says, oh yeah, we're doing project management. Some of them are focused on how to make the team work. This is what coaches like to do. Product management, about half of the people doing Agile are doing some form of product management. If you're doing product management, you're probably also addressing some of the enterprise concerns, how you do hiring, how you do bonuses, those types of things. My experience says the number of people focused on technical Agile topics is, if you're lucky, 10% of everybody doing Agile. Agile architecture fits moderately well with folks all doing the technical Agile stuff, but almost nobody's doing the technical Agile stuff, so it means that the picture of what Agile architecture looks like is kind of unreasonably complicated by the fact that most people doing Agile are just doing Agile project management, Scrum or Kanban, and they aren't taking the technical practices seriously at all. When you're doing the technical practices, fitting into Agile architecture is a whole different story. Anyway, if you're going to do Agile architecture, you need to know a little bit more what makes for well-integrated systems. Best of leading practices, we've got enterprise architecture, solution architecture, open source, continuous integration, lots of different pieces. How do we fit all of this together? Unmanaged duplication is generally a bad idea. If you duplicate stuff, then when you have to make a change, you have to make a change to every duplication. You fail, that's a problem. Managed duplication is not necessarily a bad thing. And estimates are kind of silly. I've talked to IBM's best people on estimates, and mostly they say you can do estimates off of historical data if you're careful and you have a lot of historical data. If you don't have a lot of good historical data, your estimates are going to suck and there's nothing you can do about it. prepackaged applications are nice. They give you initial capacity faster, but if you have varying needs, they don't give you those most of the time. Big data gives us the ability to capture data really fast without heavy database design. We need some enterprise planning, but not lots. We need some standards, some APIs to provide integration, but we don't necessarily need to define all of the linkages up front. We want Agile architecture, and we would like not to necessarily try for a single logical data structure, but to have a bunch of data and put it somewhere and make sure we can get data in and out. Solution architecture. Systems do have an architecture. Designing a feature means that we can save time later, but we don't know what all the features are going to be, and gold plating our systems so that we design our architecture early to handle potential future needs generally slows down development. Usually what we need is the ability to, as we develop, do some architecture work, but not necessarily all of the architecture documentation or all of the standards level. Agile tends to build custom solutions. They aren't always cost justified. If you look at product lifecycle, that shifts a little bit. Small teams build fast. If you're doing custom development, doing an Agile for small projects is almost always. The larger a project is, the more you need management. The first of the Agile methods was Crystal, and Crystal basically says, look, different types of projects need different things. The bigger the project, the more you need coordination. The smaller the project, the less you need coordination. If you have a giant project, if you're doing work for 3 years, some amount of upfront work is a good idea. If you're doing work for 3 weeks, your upfront work is a waste of your time. Enterprise package software, good for integration. If you know it handles your problems, it's a good idea. It can be difficult to get to do things it wasn't designed to do. Agile focuses on cost of change. Enterprise package software is frequently cheap early, but it might be more costly to change. Open source systems are growing. Fundamentally, what we saw is with my picture of open source as Linux was good, LAMP stacks were cheap, people started using them. In the enterprise world, what happened is Spring and Struts were open source projects. Eventually, enterprises got on board with using Spring and Struts. Spring and Struts used other projects. Eventually, we needed dependency management. We got Maven. Maven meant that we used multiple projects. You ended up with GitHub, and now open source has taken over. Basically, everybody's using open source right now because you can't run a modern Java shop without using extensive numbers of open source projects. Cloud infrastructure is everywhere right now. DevOps in particular is using cloud, but software as a service is there as well. Besides platform and infrastructure as a service, people are using these in the modern world. Continuous integration in specific, DevOps, continuous deployment in general, heavy duty work in terms of making continuous integration work. Honestly, I don't trust continuous integration solutions without heavy-duty automated testing. Heavy-duty automated testing, I don't really trust without test-driven development types of approaches. And so that's the technical Agile area that I focus on. enterprise architecture does pretty good in defining interfaces between systems. If you're going to do continuous delivery, make sure you do some amount of versioning. If you are doing continuous delivery, if you are trying to do continuous delivery, you really need to take test-driven development seriously. Very few people do. If you're doing enterprise Agile, we need to work in terms of sprints, deliverables weekly, rather than some other cycle. We focus on highest value. Sometimes we focus, instead of on highest customer value, we focus on highest enterprise risk. A lot of what an enterprise team would need to do is making sure that architecture's coordination needs between systems are part of the conversation. Agile has a great deal of unfriendliness for documentation. What we really want is a sketch of what we are trying to do, and then a tool that will build the picture of what is currently there. Modeling. Is this a fundamental tenet of enterprise architecture? Well, it's not formally in there. We don't have a necessarily agreed upon modeling approach. Use cases are really, really good. UML is over formal, and most people I know doing design have some UML background but don't do formal UML. They do loose sketches. Everybody involved in technical Agile at the beginning was a serious small talk developer who thought that object-oriented analysis and design was simply part of how everybody ought to program. And so everybody in the initial Agile projects were doing a substantial amount of object-oriented analysis and design modeling with or without extensive UML. We're seeing a big shift into modern functional programming, which doesn't have the same design approach as an OO system, but ignoring mean stack and even functional programming practices have jumped into Java 8 now. So modeling, the current best approach to modeling is not necessarily here. What you want are sketches of direction and tools that demonstrate the current system and some amount of analysis work of what the problem is, because Agile is very good at solving problems. It's not necessarily as good at identifying the problem. Some of the best technical Agile people I know have recently been spending most of their time doing object-oriented analysis and design on problems rather than solutions. Having a standard reference architecture probably isn't the same model, the current model, though in the modern world, having hey, most of us do Spring Boot on a cloud platform in Java is not actually very uncommon, or we do cloud-enabled Node.js mean stack stuff. Organization and governance. The core of modern governance is checking that people are following their practices rather than stopping development in order to get approvals. It's a really interesting shift in governance, but the Agile governance models are more and more moving to, we need evidence that you are following your ceremonies, rather than we need you to send us your proposed architecture so that we can approve it. Architects going into and participating in teams is the modern standard. Requirements. Generally, we gather requirements as we go. A lot of folks have a lot of requirements way, way early. That's fine. But that comes where over time we have a wish list that is far longer than what we can actually accomplish, and people are prioritizing their requirements. In general, Kyle's answer to requirements in an Agile world is, so long as you have 3 or 4 times as many requirements as you can actually get done, you're fine, because then people are forced to prioritize, and sorry about that. I lost audio for a sec right at the end. Requirements management. Have a lot of requirements and continually prioritize. Portfolio management. Which projects need to be done is a great question. Regular discussions about what projects are going to be done. Please try not to make all your project decisions all at once at the beginning of the year. Have regular quarterly issues to do prioritization of what project's next. Deliverables. Remember, the goal is push the button and deploy the code and automate anything that needs delivered. Agile cares about speed of delivery, speed of cycle incredibly much. If you want something in an Agile world as a deliverable, you have to be able to justify it against the cost to the cycle time, and that's a really big deal. Architectural compliance. You can have standards for how we do things. Hey, this needs to be neutral. Right now, there's fairly stable look. We're deploying stuff with JSON REST approaches as our standard answer. Focusing on interfaces is a big deal. Probably the single biggest question in software is, how do you set up interfaces? If you set up your interfaces well, life is good. If you don't, life is not good. Architecture and Agile should focus on making sure we have a good approach to interfaces. Yes, we need Agile training. I would heartily recommend to anybody who's actually listening that you don't just get Agile training in process. Most people who talk Agile talk about this, some of this, a little bit of this. Maybe this is discussed, this stuff is left off, and over time your ability to deliver on fast cycles is mostly the technical side, and this is support. Worth paying attention to. Agile's about collaboration. You need lots of collaboration inside and outside the architecture team. Can you do Agile architecture? Yes. You can do sprints. They give you incremental architectures, not final solutions. We would like less procedure, less documentation, less argument on tools. Focus on the interfaces between systems, and we're in pretty good shape. Heavy focus on continuous delivery practices and tooling and safety rather than manual reviews is a really good idea. And architecture needs to be part of the conversation to make sure somebody's paying attention to the enterprise problems and that the problems are at the table along with the business problems. Agile and architecture, they are not thought to fit together very well, but everybody involved in early Agile was serious about architecture and design. Interesting conflict. I kept you for an extra 10 minutes. Thank you so much for the patience of those who stuck around. Be here for another 5 to answer questions, and another seminar right quick here. Actually, the next one, okay. That went on a little bit long. I am going to get off, take a moment to grab a beverage for myself, and then I will get back to this. The next class is in 5 minutes. Cheers.